Most disturbing last request of death row inmates. Death row inmates have been making last requests for centuries. Some of the requests are mundane, while others are downright strange. In this video, we will look at some of the strangest death row requests. Some of these requests are shocking, and some are simply bizarre. Of course, not all requests were granted, but they provide an interesting glimpse into the minds of those on death row. Number 5. Ramirez John Henry. This is John Henry Ramirez, and the woman next to him is the driver of the vehicle, the other women. In 2004, Ramirez used a portable weapon to stab Pablo Castro to death. Then he checked his pockets and fled with $1.25. Following his crimes, Ramirez stamped and killed 45-year-old Pablo Castro, a Corpus Christi store clerk in Texas. Ramirez eluded authorities for 3 years before being apprehended in 2007 close to the Mexican border. When Ramirez was apprehended 4 years later in 2008, he was apprehended close to the border. He was charged with capital murder in 2008 and faces the death penalty. At the time of the murder, Ramirez was 22 years old and had a criminal history that included convictions for aggravated assault, burglary, and indecent exposure. Around the time of the murder, he was also accused of conducting multiple other crimes, such as multiple break-ins and another stabbing. Due to legal hurdles, Ramirez's trial was postponed for several years. In 2008, he was found guilty and given the death penalty. He was placed on death row and was to be executed there. Ramirez rekindled his faith, grew closer to God, and developed a close relationship with his pastor, Dana Moore. In mid-2021, the state announced that Ramirez would be executed by lethal injection in September. And while he accepted that his crime was heinous and that he should be punished for it, he only asked that his pastor lay hands on him and pray for him at the moment of his death. The state denied his request, and in August, he filed a federal lawsuit against the state, arguing that doing so violates his right to the free exercise of religion and amounts to religious discrimination and a violation of his liberties. The Supreme Court declared in March 2022 that Ramirez's religious rights had been violated by the refusal of his request. Number 4. Jean Hawthorne. This would have been one of the most disturbing requests, but Jean Hawthorne's was just bone-chillingly disturbing. This next death row inmate didn't insist that her pastor's hands be rested on her as she passed, but instead, they returned to fish food. This is Jean Hawthorne. The suit delayed Ramirez's execution, but he got his wish and was executed in March 2022. Jean is incarcerated on death row for the October 1984 murders of 3 members of his family. Unaware that Jean Sr. had changed his will and disinherited Jean Jr. following the incident, Jean and his accomplice, James Lee Beathard, attacked and killed Jean Sr., his wife Linda, and their teenage son Marcus. They intended to remove the family from the way and inherit the $150,000 property settlement. While Jean claimed that Beathard was responsible for the killings even though he only fired through the window, Jean dispersed African-American human hairs to cool cigarette butts in an attempt to allay suspicions. However, investigations showed that Beathard was responsible for their deaths and he was arrested and charged with capital murder. Beathard was found guilty, convicted, and later executed despite his claims of innocence. Jean was also found guilty and given the death penalty. Despite this, he argued that he was innocent and challenged the court decision, arguing that the trial in 1985 overlooked the fact that his father had mistreated him and that this had led to animosity towards his family. However, his last request is where things start to get unsettling. In the unlikely event that Jean's appeal is denied, he asked that his body be used as an artwork that serves as a larger project on the death penalty. His unorthodox request involved turning his flesh into fish food and feeding it to goldfish. The 47-year-old Jean approved of the artist Julian Everesti, born Marco Everesti. Mr. Everesti intended to deep freeze Jean's body and use it as fish food, which would allow guests to his exhibition to feed it to a school of goldfish. Fortunately, Jean won his appeal, and his sentence was reduced to 3 life terms in prison. Although Jean's request was denied because it was too bizarre, It was a good thing that Gene won his appeal because nobody would want to eat fish. Number 3. Atwood Frank's request. This is Frank Atwood. He was accompanied by his spouse and a Greek Orthodox priest, who was now in the execution room alongside Atwood. Atwood was incarcerated in 1987 for the murder of an 8-year-old Hoskinson Vicky Lynn. Atwood was charged with first-degree murder upon his arrest for the kidnapping and death of Vicky when he was 28 years old. Atwood has a history of sexual assault. In 1975, he was found guilty of violating a California law that classified him as a mentally disabled sex offender. Because of the seriousness of the crime, prosecutors sought the death penalty during Atwood's trial, but he insisted he was innocent. Judge John Hawkins, who was not persuaded by the evidence, found Atwood guilty and ordered that he be executed within 2 months. However, because of the brief halt to the executions in Arizona at that time, Atwood spent more than 30 years on death row. The reason for the pause in executions was an incident that happened during the execution of another prisoner. The drug dose administered to the convict wasn't effective, and the prisoner struggled to breathe for more than an hour before passing away. After the state resolved all legal issues and fixed the dosage issue, they scheduled Atwood's execution for June 8, 2022. This is where things start to get unsettling. Atwood was given the option to choose between dying by lethal injection or deadly gas because he was sentenced before 1992, when the statute permitting executions by gas chamber was approved. Atwood opted for a deadly gas death, but instead of the cyanide gas that the state had authorized, she asked for nitrogen gas. Despite being sad and unsettled, Atwood, age 66, was killed by lethal injection on June 8 when the state ignored the request. Number 2. Thomas Douglas Arthur. The plea from Thomas Douglas Arthur. This is Thomas Douglas Arthur on Thomas Douglas Arthur was more upsetting than Atwood's. Thursday, May 25, 2017. Thomas Arthur, a convict from Alabama, is scheduled to die. Arthur was found guilty of Troy Wicker's 1982 murder in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Due to his 1982 contract killing of Troy Wicker, Arthur is currently serving a death sentence. Judy Wicker, Wicker's wife, testified in court that she paid Arthur $10,000 to kill her husband following an affair. When Arthur first met Judy, he was incarcerated in Decatur on a work release program for the 1977 murder of his sister-in-law. Thomas acknowledged killing his sister-in-law in Marion County, but he maintained that he was not involved in Wicker's death. His lawyer proposed that Judy had implicated Arthur as the murderer to avoid the death penalty and possibly be granted parole. Because Arthur had escaped execution several times, he was known by the nickname Houdini. Arthur is the second longest prisoner on death row, having been there since early 1983. After Wicker's death, Arthur's first conviction was overturned, and his second conviction was likewise overturned, is 1991. Number 1. Timothy McVeigh. As his last supper, the Oklahoma City bomber requested 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. He was a fan of the flavor mixture. Instead, it is said that he consumed the ice cream by himself in his windowless cell the night before he was supposed to be executed by injection. After being found guilty of the murder of Dr. Edward Bartles, Victor Fager was put to death by hanging in the state of Iowa on March 15, 1963. For his final meal, Fager selected a single olive that had a pit, and he wished that the tree that represents peace would grow from his grave. When he was being buried, the olive pit was discovered by the authorities in the pocket of his suit. If you watched this far, please share your thoughts in the comments box below for more fascinating subjects. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos.